What is up, Trailblazers? I've been doing a lot of character review videos to get us ready for launch day, and so I figured it's time to liven things up a bit and do the classic gacha should you pull videos. So we are getting 2 character banners in phase 1, and if you don't know, I've been seeing a lot online that the canon opinion is you can just pull either one of these characters, or both if you've got the money or luck, because they're just really strong versions of what we will have in terms of damage capabilities in game. But the thing is, I played a lot of gacha games before, and it's very tempting to just go all in, especially on a new release, because for example, we're looking at getting 100 plus pulls right now for like the release of patch 1, and you kind of get yourself in this like false pretense of like, oh, I can just pull on banners because like the currency will keep flowing, and you find yourself very high and dry pretty quickly. And so today's video is going to be more on a review of the banner itself and also the characters, what we know about Honkai Star Rail, just that all encompassing like should you actually pull. Now don't get me wrong, both Seele and Jing Yuan are both very different characters, so it's a bit strange to say, oh, you can pull X over Y, because they're both just big damage dealers, but what they do is completely opposite from one another. I mean, Seele is a single target damage dealer and Jing Yuan is an AoE damage dealer, so there's a bit more of like a nuance to cover in terms of like playstyles, what elements we have, etc. So to cover this topic properly, I'd like to take the whole banner into consideration, so the 4 stars as well, because to be honest, when you're pulling on a gacha banner, like either one of these 2 phase banners, you're not going to net the main character straight away. There's a chance that you could lose the pity rate up, etc. Like unless you're really lucky, the odds of you getting both characters from these banners is pretty low, especially if you're free to play. And so I definitely think it's worth to give kind of a more holistic review of just this one is the stronger damage dealer of this element, and then move on. With that said, it's still important to understand just how proficient are both characters in their roles, and so for the first half of the video I'm going to cover the characters themselves and their damage capabilities, and then for the second half it will be that kind of what we know about the roadmap, the content, you know, just overall pull value and experience from gacha games. So with that said, let's get into it. Alright, so let's talk the banners themselves. Like I say, we're going to have 2 character banners during version 1 of the game, and these will be split across 2 phases. They are limited time and will not run concurrently, so it's all or nothing if you want one of the characters during that time period. If you're confused about how the gacha system works, I've covered this in my limited gacha guide video. Please feel free to check that out if you're new to a game like this, or you just want to support my engagement. So in phase 1 we have Butterfly and Sword Tip, and this banner, the 4-star pulls are Natasha, Hook and Pela, and this is Seele's banner. The second phase banner, Swirl of Heavenly Spear, sits with Jing Yuan, Sushang, March 7th, and Tingyun. So for the first half, Seele, she's of the hunt path, she's a quantum element, which is nice because there isn't a ton of quantum element at launch. She's a single target damage dealer, but she can attack a second time in one turn if she manages to take down an enemy. I wouldn't consider this as anything to write home about in terms of propping her up as something like an AoE damage dealer, but given she can rip through enemies, you might find yourself clearing content quicker than you expect with her, and actually activating this, I think it's a talent resurgence, more often than you would expect. So she's a pretty impressive single target damage dealer to have in your roster. Now the 4 stars, Natasha, Hook and Pela. Let's start with Natasha. Natasha is a healer, and we do actually get a copy of her for free just by playing the game. If you don't get Bailu, she will be your only healer, so she's definitely worth paying attention if you want to build her out with your Eidolons. We also then have Hook. She is a fire damage dealer of the destruction path. She's single target damage, she likes to cause a burn. She sits around the same level of DPS as Dan Hung. And then finally there's Pela. I really like Pela, she's an ice type buffer, well she's a debuffer, sorry, and she lowers the enemy's defense in her debuffs. She's a very good utility character and I really like her design. For the second half of the banner, so the Jing Yuan, he's a lightning element AoE damage dealer of the erudition path. His talent is a ramping up follow-up attack mechanic called the Lightning Lord that scales up as the fight goes on, and he just drops a ton of AoE damage. He scales way ahead of both Himiko, who is the standard banner AoE damage 5-star character, and Serval, who is the 4-star lightning AoE character we get for free. So people are really gravitating towards someone like Jing Yuan over Seele from what I've seen, just because he is that quite far bit ahead of Seele in terms of his own path damage output. For our 4 stars, we have Sushang, March 7, and Tingyun. Sushang is a single target physical damage dealer. Her simulation numbers are pretty cracked if you can run her in a team that will weakness break the enemy, so she's strong but under certain conditions. March 7th is one of the 2 free-to-play tanks we get. She applies an aggro drawing shield to only one of your allies, and that ally will want a healer or some form of self-sustain because this aggro drawing will pull damage towards them. So I don't know, a bit situational to some people in my opinion. Finally, we have Tingyun, our utility character. She is of the lightning element, and she works by increasing the attack of your teammates and through a few Eidolons. Her buff can also increase the ally speed and convert energy. So with Pela on the first banner, you have someone who's going to dish out debuffs, whereas with Tingyun on the second banner, she's going to actually boost up your specific ally's attack. So both very situational depending on how you want to set your team up. Overall, both banners are pretty decent. I think the main takeaway is that looking at these banners, you are actually pulling for the 5 stars here, if I'm being honest. Some things to consider in just an overall banner review is that depending on your pulls for the standard banner, a character like Yanqing can compete pretty nicely with Seele. Not to the full extent, but it's not as bad as the damage difference you would see with someone like Himiko or Seele and Jing Yuan. So something to consider is maybe run through your standard pulls if you're going to pull first, see which standard banner character you get, and then if you do end up with someone like Yanqing, again, Jing Yuan then makes the case to be your like damage dealer pull if you're going for a new 5-star character, because the damage difference available to you will just be more apparent with Jing Yuan. So not gonna lie, in terms of the 4-star characters themselves, I mean, with the 4-star damage dealers, so Sushang and Hook, I'm not really too fussed about either or character. I think in terms of single target damage, your free-to-play Dan Heng is going to do just fine. It's like, you know, if you're pulling on Seele or Jing Yuan and then you end up getting the 4-star damage dealer, you'd be fine with either character. For the kind of use support and utility, Natasha and March 7th, like I say, we both already have a copy of them just by playing the game, so it's really only if you want to go for Eidolons. And then I like both Tingyun and Pela. I don't have kind of a preference over one or the other when we're so new to the game, because you're going to be very resource stricken, and so it's more kind of like if you get one, build them into your team, and they do really good jobs of what they do, and they both kind of offer the same. It's going to sound a bit weird because one buffs and one debuffs, but they kind of offer like the same idea of basically boosting up your damage dealt. So again, it's kind of like, you know, flipping a coin on this one. The 4 stars to me, they're both good banners, like they're nice options, but they're not going to sway me in towards, you know, I wouldn't pull on this because the 4 stars are skippable. That's my opinion. But like I say, I mean, if we look at the beta damage tables, starting with single target, so Seele's ranking, I guess, you can see that the line between Yanqing and Seele isn't that far off from one another, and then we have our nearest free-to-play character, Dan Heng, dealing about 70% of the Seele-Yanqing rotation total damage. So like I say, if you pull a Yanqing, you might want to consider just avoiding the Seele banner unless you're, you know, after her for kind of, you like her design. If we look at the AoE damage table, however, you can see that Seele and Himiko trail pretty far behind Jing Yuan's output, about 76-ish% of that. So like I say, with these two banners, you are pulling for the character's damage potential alone, and so depending on how your 5-star character pulls go, if you get Himiko, you still could be lined up to pull Jing Yuan and get a massive improvement, whereas like I say with Yanqing, it's kind of up to you. It really would be kind of like maybe you want the quantum element or you want the design of the character herself. Now I will say, all that by the by, you will need 2 active teams to clear the harder Forgotten Hall content in the future, so just because you have one character for your relevant single target or AoE damage slot, so a Yanqing and a Dan Heng or a Seele and a Himiko, you still might want to factor in that it can't hurt to double down in that role if you plan on rushing or just want that character. So there's no hard feelings or like no reason to not pull Jing Yuan. I'm just really looking at this from a kind of meta perspective, like what do these characters actually do and how much will pulling them offer based on your account at launch. Okay, so while the previous half of the video just focused in on the banners at launch and kind of what that means for your account, we also need to consider that the business model of a gacha game is to get you to keep returning to spend money or your currency to pull for more interesting characters. So normally I do hate the Genshin to Honkai Star Rail constant comparisons because they are different games, and I really want my content to be like new user friendly for people who are looking to start a new separate experience without things constantly being likened to Genshin. However, it would be really irresponsible of me to ignore the knowledge we have that in Genshin, some of the phase 1 characters who saw massive use, such as Diluc or Venti's not a damage dealer by the way, but they saw a massive drop to their usage over time as new, stronger and more slot efficient characters were released. Additionally, we had characters such as Clay who were set to be pretty good on release when we looked at the kit, but then when she was like released to the community and we did our reviews and everyone was just kind of like, she's a bit of an underperformer. So it's hard, like while this is a throwaway comment, but pulling characters specifically for damage dealers in a gacha game, it's a bit difficult because they're the role that is most likely to find itself power crept the quickest. And this isn't unique to Honkai Star Rail's publisher. You know, I played Final Fantasy Brave Exvius back in the day, and the meta would change like every 5 minutes, going from characters at one point dealing thousands of damage to them now dealing like like millions of damage, and we used to only get 5 stars and it was 6 stars and 7 stars. This won't apply to Honkai, but like you never know. But also like power creep exists. And then also I play Fire Emblem Heroes, and it has a constant shift in meta to do with like a PvP element of shutting down offensive picks when they're doing too well. So it's just definitely something to consider, that in gacha games, like I say, content tends to adapt just by nature of being a gacha game to kind of shut down a lot of damage dealers to entice you to then pull future stronger versions of them. It's just something to be mindful of at the end of the day. The other thing with picking up a damage dealer is that you'll need to consider their future viability in the game itself. So not just from a gacha model, but like what exactly Honkai Star Rail is. And so the possibility of newer characters pushing them down the damage rankings is one element, but you also need to think about team comps, content, support characters. There's so much more levels to this. And don't get me wrong, I did say in my Bailu video, like I don't want to comment on characters we don't have at launch because we won't be able to play as them, but the same rule doesn't apply when it comes to a who to pull video, because we need to consider the overall economy of the banner itself. The next two characters that I'm about to talk about, they're not leaks by the way, as they were available as far back as the closed beta number 2. So let me just talk real quick about some other potential use for your currency when it comes to pulling 5 stars. In the future, we will have Silver Wolf, who can actually apply weaknesses onto enemies, and she can element shift their weakness to match that to one of your allies. So she sits as a pretty like slot efficient 5-star character that you could run with most teams, and also make your team pretty flexible, to be honest. She has like the quantum element, so you also kind of then get to steer away from, oh, there's only like 2 or 3 quantum characters at launch, because at the end of the day, while at launch, like there will be a limited element pool, it could change in the future. So you don't need to worry too much about, oh, I need to pull Seele because she's like the only one, and like no, you can relax, don't worry. For the second character, we also have Luocha, who is an imaginary element healer. He dispels buffs and has a constant application of healing without eating too far into your skill point pool, so he's kind of like not a selfish healer. And as it stands, we only have the 2 healers, Bailu and Natasha. I've done a guide on Bailu. And a very limited imaginary pool. So if you were someone who's like trying to pull for coverage in their kit, for example, like Luocha could offer a lot more pull efficiency. So while I'm leaning into these 2 5-star characters who are not damage dealers per se, it's letting you kind of think about future options for how you want to best manage your resources, especially for free-to-play characters. If you're going to want to fill out a full roster of slot-efficient characters, going for a damage dealer of a particular element might not be the best call. Also, this section of the video is also screaming for like a Kafka comment here, but she's a little too far in the unknown for me due to the lack of testing, so I'm bowing out on that one. With all that said, you can see that the case I'm trying to build here is, while I understand and respect that Seele and Jing Yuan are definite immediate DPS increases to your account, and if that's something you want to swing for, I recommend it, it's not surprising to me that the Phase 1 banner characters are damage dealers, because it offers you kind of a, I'm playing the game, I want to get a 5-star, I'm going to invest in a damage dealer, and then all of a sudden a more slot efficient character might come along and you're scarce on resources, you're going to have to swipe that piece of plastic you call a credit card if this kind of more flexible must pull character comes out, and then you're just sat there with like a damage dealer. Again though, having these increased DPS damage dealers is not a bad thing, that's not what I'm trying to say, I'm just trying to look towards the future. So my recommendation, to be honest, on the who to pull, again, totally up to your account. If you get Yanqing, do yourself a favor and go for Jing Yuan. If you really want to pull a 5-star, it's just kind of on banner review the better option, in my opinion. If you like Seele's banner better, go for it. I mean, this is like so anticlimactic, but I really like Seele's design, so I'm actually more inclined to pull for Seele, even though Danheng and Yanqing are my favorite characters. So I'm currently scratching my head as to why I'm being zesty and having 3 single target damage dealers. But I'm someone who pulls on design alone. From a meta point of view though, probably not the best idea. I mean, I'm also not guaranteed Yanqing because he's a standard banner character, so who knows. All things considered, my recommendation would be to let your free pulls play out, and then also if you can, time it so you wait until you know who is coming out in phase 1.1 and what banners they have, and then if there is a more quote-unquote slot efficient character that you care about, go for them over the damage dealers. That said, like I say, they're both great damage dealers. They are the top dealing damage dealers in their roles right now, so it's not going to hurt your account. There's no kind of bad vibes behind pulling for them. It's just something to factor into consideration. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like and or subscribe, because YouTube keeps telling me to do that, so please do. Alternatively, you could leave a comment if you're feeling extra zesty and you want to give me any reasons I've missed in this video as to why you're going to pull or skip on the banners. Thanks for your time, friends, and I will see you in the next one. Or else. Bye!